Hi, and welcome to Berry Aftercare, the podcast, where we are talking in this episode about control freaks. Has anybody ever called you a control freak? Are you a control freak? Do you even know what a control freak is? I do. You know why? Because I am one. Ooh, and it's caused me some problems in my life. So, we're going to talk about exactly what is meant by the term control freak, or what does it mean to be controlling. So, I'm going to tell you about all of that, what it looks like on the day to day to be a controller, the reasons that we try to control other people, other places, other things, etc., and what you can do if you find yourself meeting the definition of a control freak. So you can reel it in a bit and you'll be happier. And so will the people in your life. And believe it or not, just like in the past several episodes when we talked about communication skills, if you give up being so controlling with other people and other situations, you will be less likely to do things like what? Engage in emotional eating. And if this were a different podcast based on something other than being a bariatric patient, we could apply the same to those arenas. Because when we be the control freak, we set ourselves up for sabotage. Because guess what? We don't like it when people don't do what we want. We don't like it when they don't respond the way we want them to respond. We don't like it when they behave in ways we would never think of behaving, right? Oh boy. All right, so let's get into this. I'm going to tell you uh, about a story that happened to me, and you all know some of my history. You know that I went to treatment when I was 29 years old. And at that time, I had not yet come to terms with the reality that I was an addict. I had abused alcohol a lot. I was never physically dependent on alcohol. So here's something to know. And this pertains to food from my perspective as well. There are professionals who would tell you otherwise about this. But when I talk about food addiction, I mean either a biological or a psychological addiction to food. I was I was dependent on alcohol, but not physically. In other words, if I didn't drink alcohol, I didn't get the shakes and have to drink to feel normal. That was not me. Alcoholism, addiction is a progressive disease. I had not advanced to that stage. Emotionally and psychologically, I was very dependent on alcohol. I have an addiction to alcohol that is both biological and psychological. It's biological in the fact that when I start drinking, I have a hard time finding an off switch. Same with sugar for a lot of people. When they eat sugar or highly processed foods, the starchy, fatty, crunchy, very processed kinds of foods, their brain gets triggered. They have cravings. They want that food. They feel crabby without it. And they might not go through a huge physical withdrawal. Like I would have a hangover, and you might not feel so great as you come off of those processed foods or sugar. But unless you've been using them for a long, 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 long time, you're not going to be like really, really, really sick. Dependence is dependence. Some people have an emotional dependence on food. Some people have an emotional dependence on alcohol. Like I said, I had both. There was a biological trigger for me that when I drank, it was hard to stop, but I didn't need it to function. Still a biological trigger. Emotionally, for me, the emotional trigger, the emotional dependency was bigger. I thought I needed to have alcohol to be personable. I thought I needed to have alcohol to be relaxed. I thought I needed to have alcohol to be accepted, to be included, to be part of the group. An emotional dependency on food or an emotional addiction is emotional eating. If it's to the extent like anytime you feel sadness or anger or fear or whatever, you're immediately at that cabinet or that cupboard or the fridge or the freezer or the fast food place, right? You deal with almost all of your emotions with food. I believe that is as much of an addiction, a psychological addiction, an emotional addiction, as can be a biological addiction. They're different, but both are problems, right? They both lead to overeating and weight gain. And if you're a post-op, can lead to weight regain. So I talk about all of that in detail because when I went into this treatment program, it was sort of a setup by a therapist in a good way. I wasn't ready to say I'm an addict, but this treatment program had a tract for those who were family members of addicts and for the addicts. So you could go to the same program and join either of those tracks. So I was definitely willing to say, but it took me a while to get here too, even to say that I came from a family where there's addiction. It took me years to be able to say that. So now, and I believe this therapist, who's a godsend in my life, sent me there, knowing that the wise people who worked there would figure it out. Anyway, so I went to the treatment program, and it was about 2 weeks before I entered the addict tract, started over completely, because they figured it out. People who work in addiction can spot addiction. Well, prior to that, we would all meet as a group at the beginning and we had some assignments. And one of the assignments that we had was we had to talk about how we attempted to control people, family members, or the codependent people in our lives. If you have a food addiction, you've got some codependent people in your life. Even if you're an addict yourself, you probably have some codependency. Codependency is another word for control, because codependent people try to run the show. They manipulate. They try to, in the case of addiction, they may say, "Well, Daddy's not an alcoholic. He's not passed out on the floor. He's asleep." So they make excuses. They cover up. Those are the codependents, but they're really controlling. Those are controlling, manipulative moves. How? You'll find out shortly. But with food and food addiction, let me give you some scenarios that I've heard people say. The one that I hear most often is about the spouse who, after being badgered by the person who wants the fast food or whatever it is, goes out and supplies the food. They're the codependent. They're the one providing the food. When I get the full story is, if I don't do it, says the spouse or the child who goes to get the food, I get yelled at, I get screamed at, I get abused verbally. Okay, so there's two sides of the story here. We've got somebody who's an addict who's controlling and manipulating the person to go out and get the food through their behavior. So I attempted to control my spouse to get me the food by yelling at them when they said no. That was the kind of assignment we had. Or the family member would say, I attempted to control my spouse's eating by saying that I had a flat tire in my car, so I couldn't go. In other words, it's manipulating. The spouse wants the overweight person to quit eating so much, so they make up reasons. They manipulate why they can't do what the person wants. The addict tries to control the person to get with them what they want when they want it by manipulating them through anger or enticement or whatever. So these are all controlling kinds of behaviors. That's a prelude to where we're headed with this. So I had the assignment to list the ways I tried to control people in my life. And it's amazing because every night you'd have to come up with at least 20. 20. This went on for days and days and days. And they kept having me do this same assignment of how I tried to control people, how I tried to control people, how I tried to control people. I wasn't getting it. I didn't understand it. So I'm having an individual session with my therapist. And I'm going on and on, bitching and moaning, whatever I was doing. And the therapist looks at me and uses some passive, aggressive, sarcastic communication with me. Looks at me and like they're dumbfounded. And the therapist says to me, "Gee, Connie, it seems to me like nobody's behaving." And I was like, yes, finally somebody understands. Nobody's doing what I want them to do when I want them to do it. Why can't my husband just come in the house and say what needs, how do you want me to help? And I'm like, open your eyes, look around you. There's 1,000 things that need to be done, right? Nobody was behaving the way I wanted them to behave. When people don't do what we want them to do, say what we want them to say, in the way we want them to say it, at the time we want them to say it, and we get mad, that's control. Because they're not behaving the way I want them to. So think about that for a minute. If you wanted to go to such and such a restaurant because maybe in your before surgery you wanted to go to a buffet, but everybody else didn't want to. Did that really make you mad? And then did you find a way to manipulate? Like maybe said, yeah, but they have a discount code or something, knowing that that was their Achilles heel, the money. Manipulating people in whatever way it is, whether it's bribing them or threatening them or enticing them. If you do this, I'll have sex with you. That's not good, right? I mean, it might be good, but that's controlling behavior. So any time that we manipulate or we're like, if I tell my mother this, I know she'll respond in that way. So I'm going to be manipulative because this is what I want from her. That's controlling. So when we intentionally try to set the stage so we get what we want from other people, that's control and manipulation. Now, a lot of this is not within our conscious mind. It's done subconsciously, and it's done so we get our needs met because we probably are very ill-equipped in asking for what we want and getting our needs met by saying, I would appreciate this. Would it be all right if this? Or by saying, I feel angry when this happens, or I feel frightened when that happens. So we are not good, assertive communicators. We manipulate and control to get what we want because we don't have healthier skills. But like everything else, we have to learn what control is and what it looks like. So at first, when the therapist said, gee, Connie, sounds to me like nobody's behaving, I was like, how about that? Somebody finally gets it. And then it dawned on me. He was not agreeing with me. He was not commiserating with me. He was not being compassionate toward me. He was saying, girl, you are miserable because you're a control freak. So there I was, sitting in melted piles of shame and humiliation. But that's okay, because I had to learn. I had to learn how I came across to everybody else, demanding, manipulative, controlling. I wanted what I wanted, and I wanted it the way I wanted it, and I wanted it done the way I wanted it done. And when they didn't do that, it pissed me off, right? Because, like, I have the right to expect people to do what I want when they want. No, I didn't. No, I didn't have any right to do that. And yet, my aggressive, manipulative, bossy, and abusive behavior led to people, namely my husband, doing pretty much whatever I said. What did that lead to? Me not having respect for him, me not having respect for me, him not having respect for me, and him not having respect for him. That is not a good relationship, right? When we boss and manipulate and maneuver and control to get our way, our relationships fall apart. And then we feel bad about ourselves. So I would drink, or I would pop a prescription pain pill, even though I didn't have physical pain. I had a great deal of emotional pain. And I didn't feel good about myself. I didn't like who I was. I didn't like how I treated other people, especially him. And yet I didn't have the skills. I really was ill-equipped, did not know how. So it was good that I ended up here. By the way, that was when they figured out this girl, she got other issues going on. They gave me the assessments. And anyway, I started over. And then my husband started in the concerned family member tract. He had his own work to do because he had to learn to be more assertive with me and say, no, I'm not doing that. Right? And that would throw me off guard when he started learning to do that. I'm like, what, you're telling me no? I wasn't used to that. But guess what happened? It made me respect him. I'm like, thank God. Who wants to be able to push somebody around? I didn't. I didn't respect him. And you know what else it made me do? It made me learn to use kinder language. It made me learn to have more assertive communication skills and be honest with myself and be honest with him. And you know what that did? It made me feel better about me. Then I didn't despise myself quite as much. And I liked him a whole lot more. And then you know what happened? We started to come together. And then we went through those 6 weeks and we learned so much individually. And then we decided we better go to couples counseling. We've got children. We need to learn to have a healthy family. We learned more about controlling behavior and manipulative behavior, kind of the same thing. We learned how to have healthy communication skills so that we weren't behaving in manipulative ways. And we learned where this controlling behavior came from. So controlling, I wasn't a psychologist then, thank God. It took years of therapy and learning new behaviors before I even thought about going back to school. But I did it because I learned such a different way of life and I saw what a glorious, I did not know life could be so good, honestly. I didn't know relationships could be good. And when I learned that through changing my own behavior and having a husband willing to change his, that life could be so much better. I wanted other people to learn that and to experience that. That's why I went back to school, and that's why I do what I do. But so in psychological speak, controlling is really an attempt to get somebody else to cater or to conform to what I want or need. And if you get honest with yourself, when you think about your food and your eating behaviors, let me give you some other examples. I've had a lot of people tell me that they would tell their spouse they were going to stay up to watch TV rather than go to bed at the same time as their husband or spouse or wife or partner, um, and maybe go in there and just talk or cuddle or, just spend time together because what they really wanted was time alone to eat. That's controlling behavior. Or they would send the family out to do something so they could stay home and have their way with food. That's controlling behavior. That's manipulation. Yelling at your partner because they won't stop and get you your food is manipulation. And I hear that a lot. Like I would get rageful, angry with them, so they would do it. Controlling, unhealthy. So controlling people have a psychological need to be in charge. We have a need to be in charge of all sorts of things that we're not in control of. I want to be in charge of what you do. I want to be in charge of when you do it. I want to be in charge of how you come across in public. I want to be, because I don't want to be embarrassed, because I don't want to be ashamed, because I already have so much of that. So I wanted to be control of what happens, when it happens, what my husband said, how he said it, how he behaved in public, right? Pretty much how he did or said anything. It's gross, it's disgusting, it's embarrassing, but it's how it was. And I had to learn, and he had to learn, and we had to learn. We had to learn what it was and how to change it. So, being controlling is sometimes described as being manipulative. Now, who wants to hear, gee, you're really manipulative? Nobody. But it is manipulative. If I yell at you and that makes you stop and bring me the food that I want because you don't want me to yell at you, then my yelling at you is manipulative. It gets me what I want. If I buy tickets to the movie for everybody in my family and say that's not my kind of movie because I want to be home alone and raid the fridge, that's manipulative. Now that doesn't sound good, so let me rephrase it. It's also protective. It's also unhealthy learned behavior to get what we want because we don't know better. So before we go get all down on ourselves and really bash on ourselves and create even more shame for ourselves, we have to understand that even though I looked at and sounded like an absolute total jerk, and this behavior was unhealthy, it was unhelpful, it caused problems in my relationship, I was abusive. Let me tell you what's going on within the person who engages in this kind of controlling and manipulative behavior. This is how we end up being control freaks. There's tremendous amounts of insecurity for most people who are control freaks because they're trying to control things because they feel so insecure to begin with. And if I can just control the situation, maybe I'll feel less out of control inside of myself. The controlling behavior in part can stem from insecurity. I don't feel like I fit in. I don't feel like I belong. I don't feel like, right? And if I can control and manipulate you, I can feel like, okay, this is one area of my life where I don't have to be like, I just don't know. I just feel so insecure and anxious. So we try to have control over something or someone else. My husband's life set him up to be with a controlling person out of his own insecurity. We pair up with people and it's for a lot of unhealthy reasons. It's not that there aren't healthy ones too, but we are going to pair up with somebody so we can act out our unhealthiness so that hopefully we can get some help for it. Doesn't sound logical and it's very subconscious, but typically we pair up with somebody who has both the good and bad traits of the people in our life who we didn't get what we needed from, mom, dad, both, whatever. And then we see the things we like about that person in our partner, but we also sense the things that we can control and manipulate and get away with our own unhealthy behavior. And then we come together, and what we end up doing usually is recreating the problem because we're trying to fix it. What we do is we try to fix our own prior drama and trauma with our partners, and we end up recreating it until we get help. Until and if we get help. That's why a lot of people, they'll get divorced or break up and they go on, they have the same relationship with the next person and the next and the next because they've never worked through what they're trying to work through with these people. So they keep picking the same kind of person. Anywho, Another talk for another day. But inside a controlling or manipulative person is somebody who's really insecure. So what they're afraid of is this insecurity, this low self-esteem, right? They're fearful. If I can control things, maybe I won't be criticized, or um, maybe I will get some nurturing, or maybe you won't leave me, or maybe I'll feel supportive. Like I'm trying to control all of this, and what happens is it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy because I'm going to push you away. But what I'm trying to do is get something from you that I desperately, desperately need. I need nurture. I need support. And so I'm trying to control everything, trying to get that desperately. But I'm destroying our relationship because I don't know how to ask for it. I don't know how to get it in a good and healthy way. So I manipulate in unhealthy ways and then I push you away. And I end up with neglect. Or I end up abusing you, or I end up creating trauma in our relationships. So people who are controlling probably came from a family where they were expected to be perfect, or the love in the family was conditional, or they couldn't trust the adults in their lives for some reasons, or they were neglected or abused or criticized. So there's usually some childhood trauma here that results in a person being controlling because they try to get what they need, but they don't know how to do it. So they just mess it up. Another thing that a lot of people have is a lot of internal anxiety. So if I'm consciously anxious and trying to prevent the next shoe from dropping, I'm going to try to control all the moving parts so that I can prevent more dropout, more fallout, because I've had so much of it in my life. So anxiety, internal anxiety, shame, anxiety, worry, fear can create control. So we're trying to get our needs met, but we don't have the first idea about how to do this in a healthy way. So in my case, Lord, no wonder I'm such a control freak. And I still have controlling tendencies, let me tell you. But I'm much more aware, and I have a husband who is no longer afraid to call me out on it. I was both insecure and anxious. I was riddled with debilitating anxiety as a child, really like severe anxiety. And I had so much insecurity. Remember, I drank to feel like I could fit in. I drank so I could feel like I had a personality. So I was insecure and I had struggled with anxiety my whole life. I needed to have control over something. I needed to have control over some areas of my life. It's not an excuse for my behavior, but it can allow for compassion from myself and from my spouse as we started to work through it. Now, he had his own issues that I had to have compassion for and understanding how he developed his. So it wasn't just I'm the bad guy and he was the saint, although his behavior looked a lot more saintly than mine, but they were different issues that presented differently. They were much more passive and passive aggressive. I was just damn aggressive. But the compassion allows us to learn and work through the issue. Because if I'm just going to shame myself and guilt myself because, oh God, here's another thing wrong with me, I'm not going to have the strength to work through it. But if I can go, you know what? I became this way in an attempt to feel better. So if you became controlling, because maybe you wanted to control anybody else from making fun of you, or you wanted to control the situation so nobody else would call you a name or bully you or comment about your weight or what you were eating. So you learned controlling behaviors to protect yourself. And that's what most of us do. So if you find out at some point along your journey that you're a control freak, then have compassion and realize it came from some insecurities, some fears, some anxiety, some doubt, some worry. That way, You can be willing to work through it instead of go, oh my God, just more proof that I'm a loser. That's not what we want to do this. So I had to have compassion for myself so that I could begin to get help and understand that my behavior was absolutely unhealthy. Duh. I could even see that myself. I'm like, this doesn't work. We're not getting anywhere. Um, and that it was controlling. I had to learn to label it so I could identify it and do something differently. And that it was my responsibility to change it. Nobody could do it for me. I had to look in the mirror and say, wow, these are all the ways that I attempt to control. These are the reasons that I do it. I have to fix the shame and the pain and the anxiety and the insecurity while at the same time, I have to quit the ugly behavior. As a post-op, you have to fix the insecurity, the shame, the guilt, the fear, you know, the ickiness that you feel on the inside related to whatever abuse you suffered, whatever names you were called, whatever trauma or drama you experienced in your life. You have to heal that while at the same time changing your eating behaviors. It's a simultaneous process, right? We have to change the behavior, but we can change the behavior easier if we start to learn where it came from and have compassion for ourselves and learn the skills that we need. You think you can do this on your own? Doubtful. Hello, therapist. All right. So I was operating in a land of denial. Had no idea how awful I came across. Had no idea that what I was doing was considered to be controlling. Had no idea how damaging it was to me and our relationship and my addiction, and because it was further fueling my addiction, and how miserable I was and was contributing to the misery of other people. So I had to own it. I had to own it. You know, only I could learn. And I had to own it and I had to say, I need some help. Just like you might need to say, you know what, I've had the weight loss surgery, but I still have some problems and I need help. I need to learn some skills and some tools so I can live life better. And I need to learn to feel better about myself. So, what I could have done is said, you know what, I can list 50 problems that my husband has, or I can list 50 problems that my mother has, or my father, or my whomever, my roommate, my boss. Sure, we could do that. Is that going to heal me? Is that going to make me any better? Is that going to teach me the skills I need to have? Not at all. But it's so much easier, right? If you want to change, like I wanted to change, I had to do the hard work myself. I had to own my own behavior and learn different ways of doing it. And then I had to practice it and practice it and practice it. I'm still freaking practicing it. But that's what it takes, a lifelong commitment to do the hard work that it takes to get the work done, right? I could only work on me, my problems, my issues, my insecurities, my manipulative behavior, my expectations of others, which were ridiculous, my expectations of myself, which were equally ridiculous, my nasty tone of voice, my use of criticism. I had to change me, and you, if you want your life different, have to change you. So, not fun, right? Not fun. Who wants to own up? Control freak? Now, if you approach this with compassion, right? For anybody, maybe your mom's a control freak, or your dad, or your sister, or your brother, or your boss, or whomever. Look at them from the lens of compassion and go, this person's suffering in some ways. Now, you can't change them, right? If they don't change, maybe the best you can do is kind of limit your time around them or learn to set those boundaries. But maybe you muster up the courage to listen to some of these signs of being control freaks. And maybe instead of recognizing everybody else who does these things, you might see yourself in one or two of these, all right? All right, here we go. Do you often tell people they should or ought to do something? Especially think about it as a post-op. You should really try, this, or you shouldn't eat that, or you should eat this, and you should do it this way, and you should do it that way. If you should on yourself or other people, that ain't good. That's often a sign of control. Or you ought to do it my way, or you ought to do it. Shoulding and oughting and musting are signs of control freak. What about the person who has to have the last word? So you have this discussion or this argument. By God, you've got to have the last word on it, all right? Or you've got to be right. Or things have got to be done your way, my way or the highway. Control freak. Do you struggle to admit you've made a mistake? Or do you have a hard time apologizing? Controlling behavior. I don't know that I ever in my entire life, seriously, heard my mother apologize for anything. Let me tell you, this apple didn't fall far from that tree. It took me a long time to be willing to say I was wrong and to say, not only was I wrong, I need to apologize to you. Now, apologizing is one of the easiest things because it makes me feel so much better. And every time I know I'm wrong and I apologize and own my behavior, it brings whoever I'm apologizing to, it brings us closer. Every time. What I want, my meaningful matter, I want to be close to the people in my life. And I know that owning my behaviors and apologizing gets me there. Do you get irritable, upset, or anxious when things don't go as planned? Control freak. If there's a change in schedule or people are late or things get off task, do you lose your mind? Control freak. Do you have to have a plan, even for simple activities? Do you have a lot of rules and routines? Not always a bad thing, but to what extent? Do you take over and start running the show when the situation seems unstructured? You take charge, you take control. Are you a team player? Or do you want to do things your way so they can be done the right way? Are you a constant backseat driver? You should park here. Why didn't you turn there? This is the best route to take. Control freak. Are you overly critical to include of small things? Do people walk around eggshells around you? Listen, I still struggle with some of this. I still do. But I don't hate myself for it. I recognize it. I go back and I say, I'm sorry I said that. You're free to park wherever you want. You don't have to take my route. You can go whichever way you want. I don't like it, but there you go. So what can you do if you recognize that you are in some ways a control freak? First, like I said, be compassionate, right? Be compassionate. You got this way for a reason, and you have the opportunity, if you so choose, to learn ways to work your way out of it. Recognize that it's only you that can do the learning and changing. The behavior always starts with yourself. So with your language, stop shoulding, stop oughting, stop musting. Stop starting your sentences with you. You, blah, 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 this and that. Stop demanding. You need to. I didn't ask your opinion. I said I wanted. Quit being a demanding person. It's not nice. Change it to, I feel sad. I wonder if it would work better this way. Not, you need to do it this way. I'm thinking if we took that route, it might save us time. What are your thoughts? Include the other person. Be engaging, be cooperative, get their opinion. It brings you closer. It makes them feel like they're important. It makes you not be so dang demanding and bossy. Do you insist or do you enlist? Do you insist people do it this way or do you enlist their cooperation and their opinion? Take responsibility when you blow it and go back and do it again. You know what? I got real bossy in the car telling you where to park and how to turn and where to go. I'm sorry. I need to keep working on that. That's not what you need or how you deserve to be treated. Clean out your emotional closet. You got to get rid of your yuck. You're never maybe going to get rid of it, but you've got to work through it. You've got to improve your self esteem. You've got to get rid of a lot of the shame. You've got to get rid of a lot of that unresolved anxiety. You've got to learn some healthy coping skills to deal with your anxiety. You've got to learn to appreciate and value and trust and love yourself so that you are free to treat yourself better with food, to have healthier relationships with other people, to come together. It's a lot. It's a lot. But if you recognize yourself here and you can more clearly see that you do tend to engage in controlling behavior, you try to get people to conform to your needs, to do what you want so that you can be in charge, so you can feel less anxious, so you can feel less insecure, then remember, you probably need to see somebody to work through this stuff. This is not just, let me sit down with my friend and hammer this out. Your friend probably isn't going to understand it. This takes a somebody, a person who's really trained in the underpinnings of human behavior, who can help you sort this kind of stuff out. But I promise you, it will assist you in less emotional eating. It will help you prevent relapses to addictive behaviors because you'll feel better about yourself. You'll feel better about how you're treating people. You'll have closer relationships. And cooperatively together, you can build a healthier life and they can help you prevent some self sabotage. But I want you to know you can. You absolutely can change this behavior. But it is absolutely going to require time, months and months and months and years of effort, maybe months and months and months and years of therapy, forever being willing to look at yourself and your part in situations. So maybe, take some steps from here and get online, read about controlling behavior. Read about controlling situations and controlling people. A lot of times we automatically think controlling abusive relationships. There's not always abuse when there's control. Or if you're thinking about the controlling partner who says you can't be with your family and leads you away from your friend, that's a whole nother level. I'm talking about day-to-day controlling behavior. So, you know, check it out, look into it further. And if you discover as you learn more that you got some work to do in this area, and you know other people who have work to do in this area, start with yourself. Your partner may be super controlling, or your mother, or whomever, but you got to start with yourself. You've always got to start with yourself because changes in self can result in tremendous, positive, happy changes in other relationships. So I got to ask you to trust me on this and ask you to trust me that all of these topics that we talk about in Berry Aftercare, the podcast, are geared toward self-improvement, which will ultimately lead to liking yourself better, valuing yourself more, so you treat yourself better, you change the relationship with food to a healthy one, you change your relationship with everything in terms of how you treat yourself. You move your body more, you talk to people in a kinder way. All of your areas of life improve, not just your weight. You are a whole person. You don't want to sabotage this weight loss by not dealing with other issues that maybe by virtue of being human or by virtue of being raised in a less than healthy environment may have impacted you negatively. So let's get it going on, friends. Do what you need to do for you, remembering that this is your health, your responsibility, your physical health, your mental health, your social health, your spiritual health, your relationship health. You got to change you, and other things will fall into line. I'll see you next time, and thank you for spending your time with me.